Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Mr. White here with your Unit 13 test review all about World War II. So go ahead and get out your test review sheet, follow along as we go over these answers. If you don't have the test review, you can always go to my Epsilon website. It's listed right here, www.epsilon.com/Andrew White. Once you get there, go to the part where it says Showcase, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and that's where you'll find a file entitled Unit 13 Test Review. It's the one about World War II. That's the one you need. Get it out, follow along, and without further ado, here we go. Number one, what is appeasement and who practiced that policy prior to World War II? Well, appeasement is attempting to keep the peace by negotiating with the bad guys, basically giving them what they want. Some of you remember hearing the story about giving a mouse a cookie. Others may remember the story that I told about the bad kid at the grocery store crying for candy. But remember that it was Europe that tried to appease Hitler by allowing him to undermine the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, he demanded land, they gave him land, and they thought that might make him act better, but it really only encouraged him to act worse. So number two, what began World War II? What event began World War II? That was when the Germans invaded Poland in September of 1939. Remember, they used blitzkrieg. Okay. Number three, what did the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor cause? Well, it caused the U.S. to come out of that isolationist phase that we were in, and it was not good for Japan because we were seeking revenge. So, Pearl Harbor brought us out of isolation, seeking revenge. Number four, what was D-Day? D-Day was that massive Allied invasion of Normandy, which is in France. It was officially called Operation Overlord, and it happened in June of 1944. Okay, that was in my video about the European theater. Hopefully you remember that. Number five, why was the rise of Nazi Germany a result of the Treaty of Versailles? Well, you remember there were those really harsh conditions imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. And Hitler was the guy who promised to get revenge for the treaty and undo all of those really harsh conditions so that Germany could become a great country again. Alright, number six. How did President Roosevelt bring America out of the Great Depression? Well, you may remember that he created that thing called the New Deal, which helped lower unemployment by creating jobs through government programs. Okay, so he was the one who created jobs to help end unemployment. Number seven, what caused the rise of fascism in Germany and Italy? Well, there was a lot of economic uncertainty caused because there was all that hyperinflation. Remember, that's when the money lost a lot of its value and everything became ridiculously expensive. Fascism promised to defend their nation against all these problems and make it strong again. And so that's why the Italians and also the Germans went with fascism. So number eight, how did the global depression of the 1930s affect the Soviet Union? Well, you may remember that the Soviet Union is communist and they were a totalitarian nation, so their command economy and totalitarian government actually shielded them from the Great Depression. They were mostly unaffected by it. And so, number nine, why did totalitarian dictatorships gain power in the 1930s? It was because those new democracies, like the Weimar Republic in Germany, failed to meet the people's needs. And those fascist leaders like Adolf Hitler had a much more appealing plan that the people decided to follow. Okay, so moving right along, making good progress. Number 10, who was Winston Churchill? He was the British Prime Minister who wanted his people to be aware that Hitler was a major threat. He warned them about Hitler actually before Hitler started taking land. And he was also the one who resolved that Britain would fight until the very end against the Nazis, that they would never surrender to the Nazis no matter what. So he's actually considered one of the greatest leaders in British history, Winston Churchill. Alright, so why did the Japanese begin to practice imperialism in the 20th century? One of the major driving factors for the Japanese to go out and acquire colonies was that they lacked a lot of really important natural resources like coal and iron and oil. And that was the thing that they were after when they were building their empire in the Pacific. Okay, so number 12. What is fascism? Fascism is a government style where you have a totalitarian ruler. Generally, they use extreme nationalism to control the people and make them loyal. And the government also controls the media, and they often use violence and terror to silence anyone who disagrees with them. So fascism is describing the kind of government system used by Hitler and also by Mussolini. So number 12, no, sorry, we just did number 12. How about number 13? How did the Treaty of Versailles lead to World War II? Well, it created bitterness and resentment for sure among the nations that lost World War I, like for example Germany. So that was how the Treaty of Versailles led to World War II. Number 14. What was the Holocaust and why did it happen? That's a pretty easy one. Holocaust was a genocide, which hopefully you remember genocide means mass killing or mass murder. And it was the genocide of millions of European Jews and other minorities that were deemed undesirable by the Nazis because the Nazis blamed unpatriotic Jews and communists for the humiliating loss in World War I. Not to mention there had been long-standing racism against Jews in Europe way before World War II, and so the Nazis used that racism to get people on their side. Alright, so number 15. Who was Mussolini and how and why did he come to power in Italy? Well, Mussolini was that fascist dictator of Italy, and he was the guy who came to power by having the help of the army and a lot of radical nationalists who fought alongside Mussolini in World War I. And these people, of course, wanted to make Italy a strong country again, so they marched into Rome and eventually seized power. Alright, so coming up to number 16. What caused the Great Depression? Well, that was caused by the stock market crash of 1929 and also by something else that we talked about a little bit in class, but not much. It was real estate overspeculation, meaning that the value of properties was raised up way above what the properties were actually worth, and so people ended up losing money on their homes and businesses and other properties. Alright, so why was Hitler elected to power in Germany? Well, he was the one who believed he could fix the problems of Germany that were caused by the Treaty of Versailles, and he also inspired national pride, and since the economy was in ruins, the people thought they needed a strong leader to help get them out of these problems. And so that was why Hitler was elected to power, because he seemed to be the guy who could do all that. Alright, so number 18. How did Muslim nations such as Egypt and Syria react to the creation of Israel? Well, it wasn't a good reaction. They were ready to go to war in order to prevent the establishment of the new Jewish state of Israel. Remember, they were really willing to spill a lot of blood, and that's why there were many wars between the Arabs and the Jews over the years. So, number 19. What is totalitarianism? Totalitarianism is, remember, when the government has total control. It's like the word total is right there in totalitarianism. Easy way to remember. So that's when the people have no freedom socially, economically, or politically. Alright, so number 20. Why were the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And in case you don't know what bombs they're talking about, we're talking about the atomic bombs. The reason why the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is because the U.S. military wanted to avoid massive casualties, but they needed to defeat Japan. And the military knew that if they invaded Japan by land, that lots of people would die. So the idea was, if we dropped these really powerful bombs, sure, a lot of people would die from the bombs, but hopefully then Japan would be afraid and surrender to us so that we wouldn't have to invade their home islands. And even though it was kind of a grisly strategy, it actually worked. So that was the reason for the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan. Alright, so number 21. What event led to the Americans developing and dropping the atomic bombs? You may remember from our primary sources activity that Albert Einstein actually wrote a letter to President Roosevelt. And he was the one who persuaded Roosevelt to pursue atomic weapon research as a way to beat the Nazis. So just remember that Einstein was the guy who helped us get involved with this whole atomic weapon thing. Alright, so number 22. How did better weapons and tanks affect warfare during World War II? Well, remember there was that thing called Blitzkrieg, when the Germans would use tanks and motorized troop carriers to rapidly advance and take enemy territory. So this allowed troops to move much quicker than ever before, and this is part of how Hitler conquered most of Europe in about 2 years. Alright, so that's it for the World War II questions. Now we got a couple of review questions from previous chapters, so a lot of these are going to sound very familiar. You should be able to get all these right, but just to make sure, let's go ahead and go over them. So number 23, what did Enlightenment thinkers feel should happen if a government denies its people's rights? It's reflected in the Declaration of Independence. There's a little clue for you. They were the ones who believed that if the government does not protect the people's basic rights, then that government should be overthrown. Pretty basic. Alright, so number 24, what is popular sovereignty? That's the idea that governments get their power from the governed. And so if the government doesn't protect the people's rights, then the people need to get a new government. So number 25, what are some characteristics of free enterprise? That's where the people own and profit from the factors of production, and also where the people are free, free enterprise, to make their own decisions in the economy. So that's the kind of economic system that the United States uses. Number 26, what are the 4 main causes of World War I, and what does each letter mean? Well, the M in main is for militarism. That's when you build up your military a lot. The A is for alliances, and that's when countries make agreements to defend each other. The I was for imperialism, which is when the countries would go out and compete for colonies and resources in other parts of the world. And lastly, the N is for nationalism, which is that extreme pride in your own people and thinking that your people are the best. So number 27. Describe the timeline that led to the creation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Well, I don't want to get into too many details here, but just remember that there were those Petrograd bread riots. The soldiers refused to fire on the protesters. Later on that year, Lenin returned to Russia. He was that great revolutionary leader. And with the leadership of Lenin, the people called the Bolsheviks seized power from the government in 1917. So that is a really, really short rundown of the Russian Revolution. Alright, number 28. What were the German U-boats and what were they used for? U-boat stands for Unterseeboot, meaning undersea. That was what the Germans called submarines, and remember that submarines were used to attack Allied ships without being detected. Alright, number 29. What was the goal of President Wilson's 14 points? The 14 points was President Wilson's plan to prevent the outbreak of wars in the future, and of course his 14 points were not totally followed, and 20 years later we had the unfortunate coincidence that World War II broke out. Wouldn't you know? Alright guys, so that's it for the multiple choice part of the test, but of course you know that there will be an essay. If you're in on level, there's just going to be 1 essay question, and if you're in K level, remember that there will be 2 essay questions. So for K level kids, go ahead and look at your test review, make sure you know what your essay questions are, and prepare a response. Same thing for my on level students. Your 2 possible prompts are number 1, give 5 characteristics of totalitarian dictatorships in the 1930s. So you could tell me about Hitler or Mussolini. Tell me what was going on in a totalitarian dictatorship. Just 5 examples. And the other possibility would be number 2, compare the characteristics of the European and Pacific theaters. So I want to know about what was similar about the way they fought in Europe and in the Pacific, and what was different about the way that they fought in Europe and the Pacific. It'd be nice to see maybe 2 similarities and 2 differences. Now, you need to think of these things on your own. I'm not just going to tell you the answers to these because you're smart enough to know these. So just think about it and make sure that you're ready to write a response when you get to class for the test on Thursday. So guys, thanks for watching the test review video. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, feel free, subscribe, study for your test, because you know that if you don't actually study this stuff, it's not going to help you. So if you study, I think you'll do a good job. And either way, I wish you good luck.